Imagine waking up one morning and deciding, there is a life I can't keep living. Imagine folding up the public life that's been your pride and purpose and stepping into a quiet room where love asks you to start again. What would you take with you? What would you leave behind? Today, we follow one woman's brave, tearful decision, a farewell that stunned fans, comforted friends, and forced an entire world to ask, when does love become a home, and when does staying become the cost of being loved? Stay with me. You won't expect the choice she makes, and you'll be surprised at where it leads. Start with the calm. Mornings on set had become ritual. The same cups, the same crew, a small choreography of warmth. She'd been a fixture in millions' living rooms for decades, the face people felt they knew, like a neighbor. Yet beneath the bright lights there was a room where she kept a fragile truth only one person fully understood. The private tether that pulled her heart home every night. That tether was more than romance. It was a companion, a partner, a life shaped in quiet acts of care. It had grown by degrees, a shared laugh in a hallway, a cup of coffee in the small hours, an elbow resting on a book. Fans saw smiles and clever banter. Only two people knew how the world felt when they closed the curtains. And then, as often happens, a small fissure appeared. Not scandal, not a public falling out. A decision. What if public life and private devotion could not peacefully coexist anymore? That idea was the pebble that began an avalanche. She felt it in her bones, not in the headlines. We'll come back to the moment she first whispered the idea aloud, but first, let's step back and see what else had been quietly rearranging. She had been doing the same dance for decades: greet, entertain, reassure. For viewers of a certain age, her presence was a comforting constant, a cultural anchor. Many in our audience remember anchoring their mornings to a familiar voice. Our routines are built on these anchors. Yet anchors can hold you or drag you. In private, she counted the small costs. Flights missed that could have been quieter weekends, holidays that were cameo appearances rather than escapes, friends' milestones observed from a distance. She loved her work. Work had given her voice, influence, and a lifetime of joy. It had also erected a glass wall around some parts of life. When you reach an age where patterns feel permanent, the urge to change can be terrifying and necessary. Think of a garden you've tended for years. Sometimes a plant must be moved so the whole will flourish. She began thinking like that. Not about abandoning, but about repositioning. Could she prune the public in order to let the private life grow fuller? The thought was both liberating and guilty. Those two feelings would wrestle inside her for months, a quiet tug-of-war that only those closest would see. And then came the day she decided to tell Mark a simple sentence that would become a compass for what came next. She said it in the dark, in the hush of midnight, "I think I can do this differently." When two people have built a life largely away from spotlights, the small words matter more than the big ones. She told him what she felt. He paused, gathered, and said simply, "If that's what you want, I'll walk with you." There it was, not dramatic, not showy, but the kind of consent that changes courses. A lifetime of habit suddenly intersected with a gentle permission to be someone else. It's easy to romanticize such moments, harder to see the practicalities. Saying yes was an emotional hinge. It meant dinners together without the clock-yard duties, long mornings without the teleprompter's gentle drum, and slow weekends where nothing had to be executed for an audience. But it also meant giving up parts of identity. Who are you when people's attention slides away? That question is the one our protagonist had to answer. And she answered it with action. She began to gently decline more. Invitations that once felt like honors became optional. She allowed a silence to grow, not of absence, but of space where something else might take root. News travels faster than breath in the digital age. A social media whisper, a trending headline, suddenly an entire nation starts talking. Fans reacted in waves, surprise, sorrow, celebration. Many felt a personal stake. After all, public figures become family in a way. But the initial chorus of tweets and comments was not the main event. The real moment came when morning shows, editorial pieces, and friendly interviews attempted to parse what mattered. Was this a career move, a love story, or both? Our protagonist navigated this new weather with grace. Rather than a grand resignation, she released a note, personal and honest. She made no speeches, no theatrical runs against a camera. She spoke like someone writing to friends. I'm following a quieter path for reasons many of you will understand. Fans cried, some joyfully, some with a nostalgic ache. It was one of those rare moments where public affection met private decision, and both felt mutual. Yet headlines have a taste for drama. Some voices spun melodrama, others offered support. The surprising turn. Supportive letters arrived from unexpected places. Older women in small towns, ex-colleagues who had retired quietly, a retired teacher who wrote simply, choose well. The enormity of that quiet chorus steadied her, but something deeper lay ahead, a conversation with Mark that would test them both. Mark's response to her decision was not a press conference or an op-ed. He did something ordinary. He rearranged a Thursday. He canceled a routine obligation, turned off his phone for an afternoon, and insisted they go to the coast, a place of simple sunsets and lifelong memories. It was a quiet recalibration. Small acts often create the most profound reassurance. They walked along the water and talked about what mattered, the small, stubborn things that make up a life. Coffee at dawn, the smell of the dog's fur after rain, the neighbor who needed a hand. He told her plainly that love could be a shelter and not a cage. He promised not to ask her to be less than she was, nor to ask her to be exactly what fans expected. It was a love not of demands but of invitations. That afternoon became a lodestone. She returned to the work she loved with a new steadiness, and he returned to his own life with a quiet pride. But not everyone's approval matters as much as those who stand beside you. The public interest had softened into a fond curiosity, but the private work of rewriting a life is complex. They found joy in the radical ordinary, but life did not pause for reinvention, and the next chapter would bring responsibility of a different sort. When you are a public figure, commitments have gravity. She had obligations, charities, shows, and teams who depended on her. And love, while fierce, does not erase commitments, it reframes them. They both had to make choices, to carry responsibilities differently, to redistribute time. For her, this meant stepping back from daily hosting and curating the moments she would keep. But stepping back is not simply about reducing hours, it's reshaping identity. Imagine being recognized at a store, and instead of offering a polished persona, you now choose to respond with personal presence. That is a subtle but profound shift. The team she worked with was supportive. Some colleagues surprised her with warmth, others felt the pragmatic squeeze. They discussed financial considerations, future plans, and the nonprofit work she believed in, causes close to their hearts. It was not self-indulgence, it was careful stewardship. Yet compromises come with friction. Some people interpreted her retreat as surrender. Others saw a woman choosing authenticity over spectacle. That debate would simmer in the background, but the couple's next public move would transform speculation into a narrative they controlled, an act of giving that would reveal what their new life would look like. They chose a small, quiet weekend at a community center in a town that had been overlooked by headlines for years. But they didn't go to be seen. They went to listen. Volunteers gathered, and local leaders invited them to help with an evening meal program. She stepped into an apron and began serving plates. Mark sat and listened to stories. Cameras, which had become a constant buzz in their lives, were politely turned off. The only record was remembered voices, the gratitude of someone whose life had been eased, if only for a night. That evening was a revelation. People responded not to celebrity, but to presence. The headlines framed it as celebrity aid, but those who lined up for casseroles saw two people who had offered time and care. The surprising emotional current. The night's conversation turned to second chances and reinvention, themes that resonated with the audience's own lives. A retired nurse described how she had learned to pivot in her 60s. A small business owner spoke of retooling after loss. The couple listened, and in listening they learned more about the compact humanity they'd been seeking. The event became a turning point. Instead of being defined by farewells, they were now being seen in the act of building something new. But transformation invites skepticism. Critics would debate motives, cynics would point to optics. Yet beneath that noise, seeds were planted, seeds of a different public life anchored in service, not